I love Sinners. It's not just fun, it's not just smart, it's not even just beautiful. It's powerful, and this video might just be one of the most important and passionate on this channel. By the end of it, I hope you'll see why. If you've been around the channel for a while, this may surprise you. My first time recommending Sinners, I basically said I had a ton of respect for its ideas and the originality and intelligence of its execution, so I recommended it, but I had to admit, it didn't really click with me. For one thing, none of the genres it blended were genres I typically enjoy, and none of the ideas I recognized in it really resonated with me in any personal way. I mean, I'm not black or particularly musically inclined, so it just didn't seem made for me. Thus, I didn't think much about it from then until awards season, when everyone started talking about it all over again. And as I started thinking more about it and watching the numerous videos being made on it, I began to realize just how special this movie really is. This video could be hours long if I were to explore everything that makes it so profound, but most aspects of its themes have already been thoroughly covered by far smarter people than me. So I just want to highlight the one interpretation of the film that finally made it click with me. An interpretation that sadly doesn't get talked about nearly enough. And there is one particular little detail that is the key to this whole take on the film. If you haven't already recognized it, then once I point it out, I promise you'll never see the film the same way again. But before I get into it, you should know that I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. So without further ado, let's dive into one of the most memorable, thoughtful, and impactful blockbusters we've gotten in years. Let me start this discussion with the first realization needed for everyone to be able to appreciate this movie equally. Sinners isn't just about race. It is very much about race, certainly, and there's still plenty of incredible and important insight to be gained from examining its ideas about race, but I believe it also has a message equally relevant for people of all backgrounds. What I've discovered is that this is a universally relatable movie about artistic expression and identity in our capitalistic society, and despite being set almost a century ago, it is more relevant now than ever. Of course, all the movie's themes are wrapped up in its depiction of vampirism, so if we want to understand the movie's ideas, we need to understand what its vampires represent. First of all, let me dispel the most surface-level interpretation. The vampires do not represent racism. After all, Remick, the leader of the vampires, is Irish, an oppressed minority himself, so any interpretation that compares the vampires to privileged white people taking advantage of minorities is inherently flawed. So what do they represent? Well, let's start by asking what they say about themselves. In their sales pitch, they offer a community of indiscriminate fellowship and love, and I believe they sort of mean it. I'll come back to that sort of in a bit. They welcome all races and cultures, and they seem to hate the bigotry of the Klan as much as anyone. In fact, aside from Bert and Joan, the vampires are all minorities, victims of discrimination themselves. So it seems safe to assume they're genuine. They offer themselves as the protagonists' only escape from the system of oppression that seeks to destroy them, and while I wouldn't take them totally at their word, they certainly are one way out, one that Stack takes, and, well, guess which of the twins lives to the end of the film. Their methods of conversion may be gruesome, but there is an appeal to their promise, and they stand in stark opposition to the more obvious villains of the place and time of the story. In fact, I'd argue the vampires of the film aren't even evil in the same way as the Klan. They see themselves as a solution to the systems of oppression around them, erasing all the lines and boundaries that keep some in power and others in fear and poverty. That isn't evil, but the danger is that they do so, while also erasing individual and cultural identity altogether. Perhaps in part because of this lack of identity, something is clearly meant to be off about them. If the love they offered seemed genuine, I would question if they were really as villainous as they seem. However, their idea of love and fellowship is clearly superficial and hollow. Bert and Joan can only repetitively parrot the same couple cheap platitudes to Mary in their attempts to comfort her, and Cornbread seems incapable of dropping his lighthearted, carefree demeanor when he's supposedly shocked by Stack's death and eager to console Smoke. They offer a semblance of community, but it's not the real thing. All they really want is to consume the souls, or the individual and cultural identity, of those they assimilate. Real intercultural appreciation and community is not the villain of the movie, as the Chows are welcome in the juke joint, and we even see their ancestors join in the surreal musical sequence, and Mary's family aren't presented negatively for being mixed race and selflessly taking care of the twins after their father's death. That's real fellowship and love. What the vampires offer is something far more predatory. Of course, it's worth mentioning that Stack and Mary seem genuinely horrified when Smoke kills Annie, so they're not incapable of real pain, but it seems safe to assume that in being connected to the hive mind, they are reduced to shadows of their former selves, which Stack seems to hint at in the end when he reflects on that fateful night, the last time he saw the sun. And just as the vampires themselves are stripped of their soul, so is their music. See, some people seem to think that the danger of vampirism in the movie is that the black people who assimilate lose their connection to their culture because they only sing white songs once they become turned, but that's just not true. Pick Poor Robin Clean, the song they sing at the door to try to get in and later to taunt the survivors when they've got the Jukes surrounded, is a traditional black song. Besides, the white songs they sing have plenty of cultural meaning of their own. Rocky Road to Dublin is all about the cultural identity and oppression of the Irish people. Not to mention that if white people engaging with black culture was the issue, Ryan Coogler wouldn't have let Ludwig Göransson, a white composer, make the score for this film and involved a bunch of white musicians to blend modern rock influences with the historical blues in the film. The problem with vampirism in the movie isn't that it's white people infiltrating black culture or imposing their culture on black people, as some have argued. It's that, as I briefly mentioned before, once individuals are turned, they can only consume art, not create it. See, this is the realization I mentioned earlier that finally made this movie click for me. Every song sung by living characters in the film was written for the movie, whereas the vampires only ever sing songs that already existed in the real world. As the movie shows, music is an art form, an expression of cultural and individual experience and identity. The blues in particular are an expression of black culture born from the pain of their oppression. On a more personal level, we see how the characters use music to express themselves in ways they can't otherwise. Slim uses music to deal with his pain, turning his raw emotion into a rhythm after telling his horrific story in the car ride, while Sammy uses his music to speak from his heart, saying the things he wishes he could tell his own father in his lyrics. That is what makes their music magical. They pour themselves into it. It comes from their souls, and thus the music has soul of its own. And in the lore of the film, it is that soul that allows it to transcend the veil between life and death and connect the artist to their ancestors and descendants. It's not that the songs the vampires sing never had the same kind of soul when they were created, but they have stripped them of that soul in the same way they have been stripped themselves of their own individuality and pain, the things from which art is born. They have nothing to express anymore, and are thus incapable of creating such art for themselves. They are left to endlessly consume and regurgitate the art of their victims. Remick craves Sammy's gifts because he longs to be able to connect with his own people, his own culture, once again through this pure form of expression. He craves the soul in Sammy's music because he has none of his own. However, while this is purely speculation, I suspect that, if turned, Sammy would lose his spiritual gift along with his ability to create and express himself through his art, making Remick's goal entirely futile. The vampires have lost their own souls, eternally connected to one another, but disconnected from the spiritual realm to which the living are connected through art, leaving them without pain, because you can't have pain without individual experience, but also leaving them forever hungry for that which they can only imitate. So what does all this represent in reality? I don't think Ryan Coogler intended this story as a blatant allegory for just one specific thing in the real world, and I've seen many interpretations I love, so don't take anything from here on as an attempt to put my words in the director's mouth. This is just the parallels I see as I look for how these ideas play out in the world around us. Let's start with a take that gets discussed most, the music industry. I don't have a lot to say about this interpretation because it's already been talked about to death, and I'm no expert in the subject. But suffice it to say, just as Slim points out within the film, white people love the blues, if not the people who make it. The film is all about music, so I'm sure it's offering some commentary on how the music industry has exploited minorities by appropriating their unique flavors of personal and cultural expression. But since, as I've discussed, the main villain is a minority himself and the black vampires are just as much perpetrators as victims, I don't think the film is as interested in pointing the finger at white producers and artists in the music industry as it is with looking at what minorities themselves sacrifice to succeed and gain popularity and success in the industry, watering down their expression and losing touch with their cultural roots as they commercialize their art. Of course, this goes far beyond just music. All of the lessons in this film can be applied to all kinds of art, and as one who loves stories, and movies in particular, I find myself thinking most about how this applies to Hollywood. And you know what? considering the vampire's hollow pretenses of love and acceptance, the vampirism of this movie seems to work perfectly as an analogy for Hollywood's forced attempts at diversity and representation in the name of love and inclusivity. To be clear, I'm not saying diversity is inherently bad. I'm referring to lazy race swapping for its own sake with no regard for cultural or narrative context. I'm referring to movies cast by studios trying to meet diversity quotas and reach the broadest possible audiences rather than producing genuine art. And I'm referring to the lack of films like this one, made by and for the group supposedly loved by Hollywood, films with real soul and identity. This take on the film's message would make it quite a similar indictment of the hypocrisy of progressive elites to Jordan Peele's Get Out, except in my opinion with far more nuance as well as more great music and vampires, which are all positives. But even taking race and politics out of the picture, which is hard to do entirely with this film, it still speaks to the state of Hollywood and all aspects of the entertainment industry with the way consumerism has hijacked and commercialized genuine art, stripping it of its soul to make it as palatable and reproducible as possible. This is incredibly obvious in Hollywood with the way franchise slop has replaced auteur-driven filmmaking, as I discussed at length in my recent video on the Oscars. But across the board, entertainment has become less and less concerned with art and more focused on content. This shift has been greatly facilitated by the internet and has come to a head in recent years as AI has forced us to ask if humans are really necessary to create entertainment. This video could go on for so much longer if I were to fully unpack that can of worms, but I hope you can see how this subject is relevant to the themes of this movie. The vampires could not create, they could only consume. And we're entering a time when we are being forced to ask ourselves if we still value true creation for creation's sake anymore, or if we're just content to endlessly consume like vampires. Art is about creation, while content is about consumption. So no matter how impressive AI gets, it can only make content. It can only regurgitate the assimilated soup of all human expression, just like the vampires of Sinners. Real art, real creation, is spiritual. It connects us to something higher than ourselves in a way mere content never can. And fortunately, many people are recognizing that. So if you're still disgusted by AI no matter how good it gets at replicating human content, then that means you still value art. You still value creation. Sadly, too many people don't. And whether it's made by AI, corporations, or just people online more concerned with popularity and money than with creation itself, soulless content is drowning out real art in our media. So if you don't want to become a vampire, a ravenous member of the cultural hive mind with no ability to create or connect to the soul of that which you consume, then support films like Sinners. And for the love of art, go and create something for yourself. Get off your device and learn a skill. Tell a story. Put something into the world that only you could make. This video was not by any means a comprehensive look at all the brilliantly poignant ideas packed into this film. In fact, it's quite possible that I barely scratched the surface. I only touched on its concepts of money and family, and I didn't even begin to get into its thoughts on such loaded topics as systemic racism and religion. Part of the reason is because if I waited to make a video until I felt like I fully understood everything the film wanted to say, I never would. And if I can be totally honest, another part is because I'm still not sure how I feel about some of its apparent attitudes regarding those topics. However, any film that clearly took this much thought and can make me think so hard about it for so long is more than worthy of all my admiration and respect, regardless of whether or not I understand or agree with everything it has to say. This movie is exactly the kind of true art it is all about, and if you haven't, I beg you to see it for yourself. But what do you think? What aspects of the film's themes resonate most with you? Do you see what I see in it? And if so, did this blow your mind as much as it did for me, or was this obvious to you from the start? I want to hear all your thoughts on this masterpiece, and I can't wait to join the conversation with you down in the comments. After all, I'm just here to kick off the discussion, so please, just keep thinking out loud.